Imagine a king who once embodied power, majesty, and strength only to descend into a grotesque figure so deformed by disease and pain that his body became a horrifying spectacle. Henry VIII, the mighty ruler who broke with Rome, executed 2 wives, and reshaped English history, ultimately met a death so gruesome and humiliating that it's almost never told in full. His final years were marked not by the glory he had once known, but by the stench of decay, excruciating pain, and a growing paranoia that consumed him. This is the untold story of one of history's most powerful monarchs whose body, once the symbol of absolute power, became a harrowing symbol of human fragility. What happened to Henry VIII in his last years will shock you. It's a tale of decay, desperation, and the cruel end of a king who believed he could conquer everything but not his own mortality. Stay with us as we unravel the gruesome truth behind the death of Henry VIII. Once the proud and mighty King of England, whose image graced the most majestic portraits, and whose decisions altered the course of history, met his end in a way that none could have predicted. His final years were a harrowing tale of suffering, a grotesque transformation that contrasted sharply with the regal figure he once was. The king who had commanded armies and executed rivals with a mere snap of his fingers was reduced to a feeble, deformed shell of his former self. It is almost too difficult to imagine that the king who once stood tall, handsome, and full of life would end up in such a tragic and grotesque way. The turning point came in 1536 when a horrific jousting accident left him with a wound that would never heal. This injury would not only mark the beginning of his physical decline, but also his psychological unraveling. What followed was not only a decline in his physical appearance, but a transformation into a cruel, paranoid tyrant. His leg ulcer, a festering open wound that emitted a nauseating odor, made it impossible for him to walk, and his enormous weight made even the simplest movements unbearable. His daily life became a battle against the pain and the humiliation of his decaying body. Yet this king, once known for his charm and leadership, was now seen by many as a repulsive figure, and the odor of his rotting body became the symbol of his reign's collapse. What followed after his fall from grace was even more tragic. Henry, isolated by his deteriorating health and distorted appearance, became a victim of his own paranoia. His once majestic court, filled with powerful men and women, turned into a place of fear and whispers, as even the slightest mistake could result in accusations of treason. His obsession with food security, driven by the fear of being poisoned, became one of his many obsessions in his final years. But it wasn't just the power he had lost that made his death so tragic. It was the humiliation. As his body deteriorated, it became clear that the king who once seemed invincible was no different from any other mortal. His funeral, plagued by the smell of his decaying corpse, was a painful reminder that power, wealth, and glory are fleeting, and even the most powerful rulers cannot escape the inevitability of death. The once great Henry VIII, a man who redefined England and sought to rewrite the laws of his kingdom, ended his life as a grotesque symbol of human fragility and the inevitable decay that comes with time. His death, filled with suffering and shame, serves as a stark reminder of the fleeting nature of power and the tragic irony that even the mightiest king could not escape the ravages of his own body. Imagine the once great King of England, Henry VIII, whose very name evoked power and dominance, now reduced to a shell of his former self, trapped in a decaying body that no longer resembled the man he once was. It's impossible to reconcile the image of the young, handsome monarch who ascended to the throne with the grotesque figure who endured suffering in his final years. A king who had once been considered Europe's most attractive prince, praised for his athleticism and strength, now found himself shackled by an ulcerated leg and an ever-expanding waistline, his body a painful reminder of his mortality. Henry's physical decline began after a horrific accident in 1536, when a jousting fall caused a wound that never fully healed. The wound, which soon became a festering ulcer, exhaled a revolting odor that became impossible to ignore. This once proud king, whose presence had commanded respect and admiration, was now a source of disgust for all who came near. He could not walk without aid, and his body grew so large that door frames had to be widened to accommodate him. A man whose figure once symbolized strength had become unrecognizable both to himself and to his court. But the horror of his physical condition was only the beginning. As his body betrayed him, so did his mind. Henry, plagued by pain and paranoia, descended into a state of mental instability. His cruelty, once methodical and strategic, became erratic, fueled by imaginary conspiracies and unfounded fears. He ordered the executions of close friends, loyal advisers, and even his young wife, Catherine Howard, when he discovered her infidelity, exacerbating his already shattered state of mind. The same king who had once led with authority and charisma was now feared by those around him, unable to escape the prison of his own deterioration. And yet the true tragedy of his life didn't end with his cruel reign. It was his death that remains one of history's most unsettling legacies. His body, swollen and deformed, slowly rotted away, and when he died, the stench of decay was unbearable. His coffin, too large for the royal crypt, leaked fluids, and stray dogs licked up the remnants. This powerful king, who had once controlled his kingdom with an iron fist, had been reduced to a grotesque spectacle, a victim of the very mortality he had tried so desperately to control. The death of Henry VIII serves as a powerful reminder of the fragility of life and the inevitable decline of all, no matter how mighty. His transformation from an admired, charismatic ruler to a paranoid and grotesque figure is a testament to the destructive power of time, disease, and unchecked power. His final years, marked by suffering and humiliation, serve as a chilling reflection on the price of power and the inevitability of death. Imagine a once powerful king, celebrated for his strength, intellect, and political prowess, reduced to a broken shell of his former self. Henry VIII, the man who reshaped the course of history with his defiance of the Pope and the establishment of the Church of England, faced an ignoble end that contrasted starkly with his early years of splendor. The vibrant, athletic monarch, whose very presence commanded respect, was soon consumed by a deteriorating body and an unstable mind. The turning point in Henry's life came in 1536, after a tragic accident during a jousting tournament. At the age of 44, the fall left him with a wound that would never heal, transforming into an open ulcer that exhaled an unbearable stench. The very king who once stood as the epitome of virility was now forced to contend with a humiliating physical condition. His legs, once a symbol of strength, now bore the weight of a grotesque ulcer, and his body, once athletic and regal, began to swell, making him almost unrecognizable. Henry's weight ballooned to over 400 pounds, forcing him to rely on a pulley system to move between royal chambers. His vanity, once a driving force in his confidence, now stood in stark contrast to the monstrous figure he had become. This physical decline was not merely a matter of bodily decay. It marked a profound shift in Henry's behavior and mental state. As his body withered, his paranoia grew. His once confident and charismatic rule transformed into a reign fueled by fear and suspicion. His obsession with imaginary conspiracies led him to execute those closest to him, and his mental instability reached its peak with his irrational decisions. His violent outbursts, once directed at his enemies, now turned inward, alienating even those who had served him loyally for years. The final years of Henry's life were a brutal, agonizing existence, trapped within his deteriorating body and a mind consumed by dread. The once great king who had defied the Catholic Church, reformed English religion, and sent 2 of his wives to the scaffold, now found himself confined to his chambers, unable to escape the suffering of his physical and mental torment. When death finally came for him in 1547, it was the culmination of a long, painful decline, one that left him unrecognizable, not just to those around him, but to history itself. Henry VIII's story is a stark reminder that even the most powerful monarchs cannot escape the ravages of time. His reign, marked by his lust for power and his struggle for a male heir, ended in humiliation and suffering. The legacy he left was not one of grandeur, but of a broken man who ultimately fell victim to his own body's betrayal, a tragic and haunting end for a king who once ruled with absolute authority. Imagine a man who once held the world in the palm of his hand, commanding armies, changing religions, and shaping nations with a single word. Now picture that same man, the mighty Henry VIII, reduced to a bloated, decaying figure, his body a grotesque shell of its former self, betraying him in ways no enemy ever could. The king who once stood tall and proud, a beacon of royal majesty and power, now lay in a bed of sickness, tortured not only by the ailments of the flesh, but by his own mind spiraling into paranoia and fear. This wasn't the death of a king. It was the brutal undoing of a man who thought himself above the laws of nature. Henry VIII, once known for his charm and captivating presence, was now forced to contend with a world that no longer recognized him as the imposing figure he once was. His once athletic frame had been swallowed by obesity, a result of overindulgence and a life of excess. His weight ballooned to over 400 pounds, and the king who had once been admired for his golden red hair and angelic looks now looked unrecognizable. But it wasn't just the physical transformation that shattered Henry. It was the slow and insidious transformation of his soul. After a jousting accident in 1536, Henry's leg wound turned into an open ulcer, causing unbearable pain, the smell so nauseating that those around him could barely endure his presence. The king, who had once commanded with authority, was now reduced to a man who could not move without assistance, requiring a specially designed pulley system to carry him between royal chambers. The stench of his decaying body lingered in every room, and the once glorious monarch now became the object of mockery, even as he tried to maintain the facade of power. As Henry's health deteriorated, so did his mental stability. The once vibrant king, obsessed with securing a male heir, now found himself fixated on fear of poisoning, fear of conspiracies, and paranoia that drove him to execute those closest to him. His mental state deteriorated, and his reign became one of suspicion and terror. The same man who had once broken from the Church of Rome and executed 2 of his wives was now a shell of himself, locked in a struggle with his body and mind. Henry VIII's death was not just the end of a king, but the painful collapse of a legacy. The man who once bent the course of history to his will now lay at the mercy of his own body's decay, his once great image shattered beyond recognition. His story is a powerful reminder of the fragility of life, even for the most powerful among us, and a somber lesson in how time, unchecked power, and the inevitability of mortality can break even the mightiest rulers. Imagine standing in a room where once a powerful king who reshaped the course of history now lies helpless in his final days. Henry VIII, the king who once commanded armies, broke with Rome and demanded the execution of his wives, now faces a cruel and humiliating decline. What happened to this mighty monarch? What cruel irony led to the gruesome end of the man who once defined English power? His death was not just a physical deterioration, but a stark symbol of the fragility of human power. At the height of his reign, Henry was known for his charisma, athleticism, and towering presence, a king whose beauty and strength were admired by all. But the years of indulgence and excess took their toll. The once handsome king became a bloated figure, his waist expanding beyond recognition, his body no longer able to function as it once did. His health began to deteriorate following a fateful jousting accident in 1536. The injury to his leg transformed into an open, festering ulcer that released a nauseating odor announcing his presence before he even entered a room. This was a cruel fate for a man so obsessed with his appearance and power. The king who once commanded respect through his regal bearing now required a specially designed pulley system to be moved around his royal apartments. The humiliation was unbearable, not just physically but emotionally. His paranoia grew and his temperament soured as the pain and indignity of his condition took their toll. The king who once executed others without mercy was now a prisoner of his own body. As his health failed, his paranoia intensified. He executed his closest allies, driven by a fear of betrayal and a fixation on conspiracies. The once great monarch who had molded the future of England through his decisions was now helpless, screaming in pain and reliving his worst fears. Henry's death wasn't just a loss for England, it was the death of an era. His bloated body, trapped by disease and torment, marked the collapse of a man who once seemed invincible. The smell of his decaying flesh, the final indignity, symbolized the limits of his power, a power that had once seemed eternal. In his last days, Henry was not the proud king who had shattered traditions and changed the course of a nation. He was a broken man, reduced to a grotesque shadow of his former self. In the end, Henry's death was a stark reminder that no matter how powerful one becomes, the body will always betray. The man who had defied the Pope, redefined English religion, and sent 2 wives to their deaths could not escape the inevitable decay of the flesh. His death serves as a sobering reminder of the fragility of life, even for the most powerful of kings. Imagine the dissonance between the mighty king Henry VIII, once heralded as a force of nature, and the grotesque sight he had become by the end of his life. The man who had once towered over Europe, leading armies and defying the Pope, now faced the cruelest fate of all, the disintegration of his own body. Henry, who had been admired for his athleticism and good looks, had grown so obese and crippled by illness that his body could no longer carry the power it once did. The regal figure who commanded respect became trapped in a decaying body, humiliatingly dependent on those around him. It all started with a seemingly harmless fall during a jousting tournament in 1536, an accident that would leave Henry with a debilitating injury to his leg. The wound never fully healed, leading to a festering ulcer that emitted a putrid odor, a constant reminder of his crumbling health. It was a humiliation beyond measure for a man who had once been revered for his strength, beauty, and masculinity. His body had betrayed him, and the pain was relentless. The once powerful monarch was reduced to a mere shell of himself, burdened by the slow decay of his flesh. Henry's physical decline mirrored the unraveling of his mind. The king who had once ruled with absolute authority now became obsessed with his own death. His paranoia reached fever pitch as he feared being poisoned and even executed close friends and loyal advisors on baseless suspicions. His once brilliant mind, which had driven political and religious upheaval, was now clouded by delirium and mental instability. His body had not only failed him, but so had his mind. Yet as his body continued to deteriorate, Henry clung to the image of power, fearing that his death would weaken the monarchy he had created. Despite his physical and mental suffering, he refused to face the truth that his end was inevitable. It's haunting to think that as he lay dying surrounded by loyal courtiers, no one could bring themselves to say what was obvious to everyone, that he was nearing the end. Even as his flesh rotted, Henry's reign, his image, his legacy, and his absolute authority, which he had spent his life cultivating, had started to crumble. In his final moments, Henry's existence became a powerful paradox. A king who had once stood as a symbol of absolute power and dominance, now reduced to a diseased and bloated corpse, forgotten by many and merely tolerated by those who surrounded him. His death, so far removed from the glory of his life, serves as a reminder of the fragility of even the most invincible of kings. As we reflect on the tragic and humiliating end of Henry VIII, it serves as a powerful reminder of the inevitability of human frailty. No matter how mighty, influential, or powerful one may be, our bodies and minds are not immune to decay. Henry, who once defied nations and restructured religion, ultimately fell victim to the very mortality he could not control. His story teaches us that power, wealth, and glory are fleeting, and no amount of authority can prevent the inevitable passage of time. The true lesson from Henry's life and death is that even the greatest among us are vulnerable to life's natural forces. His end, marred by pain, illness, and isolation, underscores the importance of humility, self-awareness, and a deep respect for the limitations of our own existence. While ambition and power are essential to shaping history, it's equally important to recognize that true legacy comes from more than just triumphs. It lies in how we manage the challenges we face and treat others along the way. Let Henry VIII's story serve as a reminder to us all to live with purpose, acknowledging that while we may strive for greatness, the true measure of a person is found not in the title they hold, but in the strength and integrity with which they face their inevitable human journey. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another deep dive into history's most fascinating and revealing tales. Stay with us as we continue to uncover the powerful stories that shape the world we live in today.